Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. It was the deep, unsettling hours of the night when the truth first whispered itself into existence. I lay still next to my wife, Linda, whose gentle breaths occasionally broke into murmurs. Normally, I would have dismissed her sleepy utterances as the benign side effects of dreams. But tonight, the words that slipped from her lips carried a weight that pressed cold and heavy against my chest. "Jonathan, oh, Jonathan," she sighed, a tender smile curling her lips in the moonlit darkness of our bedroom. Her hands clutched the sheets, her expression one of longing, of distant desire. It wasn't my name that she whispered with such affection. Jonathan. The name stung, a sharp intrusion into our shared life. In the morning, the shadow of that name hung over me. Linda, ever the picture of suburban grace, hummed as she flipped pancakes in our sun-soaked kitchen. The contrast between her daytime demeanor and her nighttime confessions couldn't have been starker. "Who's Jonathan?" I asked abruptly, my voice cutting through the hum of the morning. The spatula paused mid-air, her hand trembling ever so slightly before she resumed her task. "Oh, just someone from work. Why do you ask?" Her casual dismissal didn't reach her eyes, which darted away from mine. The seed of doubt was planted, watered by her evasion. My days filled with silent surveillance, my nights, with listening to her betrayals whispered in sleep. Each mention of Jonathan's name was a thread in a tapestry of deception, each thread pulling tighter around my heart. Then, one unsuspecting Tuesday, I returned home early. The melody of a violin floated through the air, its mournful tune a stark contrast to the laughter that accompanied it. I followed the sound to its source, the half-open door of our basement. There, in the dim light, was Linda, eyes closed and swaying to the music. And there was Jonathan, coaxing the haunting notes from his violin, the bow dancing in his hands. Their bubble burst as I stepped into the room. The music screeched to a halt, the violin bow slipping from Jonathan's grasp and clattering to the floor. Linda's eyes flew open, her dreamy expression dissolving into one of horror. "Mark. This isn't." "Save it," I cut her off, my voice hollow. The betrayal was no longer a whisper in the dark, it was here, tangible and devastating. The pain was acute, a physical ache that demanded action. Over the following days, my shock fermented into a cold, calculated fury. Revenge took shape in my mind, a meticulous plan to dismantle the lives of those who had wronged me. I gathered evidence of their affair, documented their lies, and prepared for the strike that would sever our bonds forever. The day I filed for divorce, I met Jonathan's gaze one last time. "I hope she's worth it," I said, my voice steady, the documents in my hand a testament to the ruin I intended to leave in my wake. As I walked away from the courthouse, the final echoes of their pleas faded into the background. I didn't look back. The future was uncertain, the pain still fresh, but one thing was clear: Linda and her lover were now phantoms of a past life, never to cross my path again. The world seemed to slow in the weeks following the divorce filing. Each day was a deliberate step in a dance of destruction, orchestrated by the pain of betrayal. Linda's attempts to reach out were blocked, her messages unread, her calls unanswered. I had severed all personal connections, leaving only legal ties to be untangled by indifferent lawyers. It was a crisp Wednesday morning when I decided to take the battle to the public arena. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a digital arsenal at my command. With meticulous precision, I crafted a blog post, not just any rant, but a well-documented exposé of Linda and Jonathan's affair, complete with dates, places, and veiled photos of the two. The click of the "publish" button sent a ripple through our social circles. By noon, the post was viral. Friends, acquaintances, and strangers devoured and shared the saga of deceit. The reactions poured in: sympathy, outrage, and everything in between. Linda's pristine reputation, cultivated over years as a community organizer and charity advocate, began to crumble. That evening, I received a call from a mutual friend, Tom, his voice tense. "Mark, this is getting out of hand. Linda's lost her job, and Jonathan, his wife, kicked him out. Was this your plan?" "Yes, Tom, it was," I admitted without a hint of remorse. "They deserved it." The line was silent for a moment before he replied, "I hope you find peace in this, Mark. But remember, revenge has a way of coming back around." His words hung heavy, but the satisfaction of retribution was intoxicating. A week later, I confronted Jonathan in person. He was staying at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the luxurious life he had led. I found him outside, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his eyes hollow with defeat. "Mark," he started, his voice rough, "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was just—" "Save your apologies, Jonathan. They mean nothing now," I interrupted coldly. He looked up at me, desperation etching his features. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to suffer, just as I did. And you are, aren't you?" My question was rhetorical, the answer written clearly on his weary face. Jonathan dropped his gaze, his shoulders slumping. "Yes," he whispered. Satisfied with his misery, I left him there, a broken man in a pool of his own regret. Meanwhile, Linda became a shadow in the town. With her career and social life in ruins, she moved to a small apartment, isolated from the friends who had once flocked around her. One afternoon, I drove past her new place, curiosity getting the better of me. From the safety of my car, I watched as a solitary figure returned from the grocery store, head down, the weight of her world on her shoulders. As I pulled away, a part of me felt a twinge of sadness for the life we had once planned together. But it was quickly swallowed by the bitter taste of betrayal. The revenge felt complete, yet it was hollow. The cost of my actions began to dawn on me. I had broken their lives, but at what cost to my own soul? As autumn ushered in colder days, the warmth of my vindication began to wane. My solitary existence was punctuated by moments of regret that gnawed at the fringes of my satisfaction. The community's judgment, once a chorus of support, had shifted subtly. Whispers of my ruthlessness blended with the falling leaves. I was sipping coffee in a corner of the local cafe when I overheard a conversation from the next table. Two women, their voices laced with concern and disapproval, discussed the fallout of my actions. "Mark really went too far, don't you think? Linda's been destroyed," one woman said, her eyebrows knitting together. "Absolutely, and what about Jonathan? I heard he's barely getting by." "It's just all so harsh," replied the other. Their words stung, a reminder of the community's shifting perceptions. I left the cafe with their whispers trailing behind me, a reminder that my quest for justice had painted me as a villain in some eyes. Later that day, driven by a restless urge to confront the consequences of my actions, I visited Linda. I found her outside her apartment, tending to a small array of potted plants, her attempt at adding life to the stark surroundings. "Linda," I called out, my voice tentative. She straightened up, her surprise quickly masked by a guarded expression. "Mark. What are you doing here?" I wanted to see how you were," I admitted, shifting uncomfortably. Linda paused, then sighed. "I'm surviving, Mark. What more do you expect?" Her words, simple yet heavy, opened a floodgate of emotions. "I'm sorry, Linda. For how everything went down. I was hurt, and I lashed out. I didn't stop to think about the fallout." She studied me for a long moment, her gaze searching. "I appreciate your apology, Mark. But it doesn't change what happened. We're both living with the consequences of our choices." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. "I know. And I regret that. If there's anything I can do. Just, give it time, Mark." "Maybe that's what we both need," she interrupted gently, turning back to her plants. Leaving Linda's apartment, I felt a mixture of relief and renewed isolation. The encounter, though brief, was a stark reminder of the lingering scars of our shared past. Driven by a newfound resolve to amend my ways, I decided to approach Jonathan next. I found him at the same rundown motel, looking slightly better than before, but still a shadow of his former self. "Jonathan," I started, unsure of my welcome. He looked up, wary. "Mark. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I came to apologize. For the public humiliation, for everything. I've been thinking a lot about how things went down." Jonathan's face softened slightly. "That means more than you might think, Mark. I've had a lot of time to reflect on my own mistakes too." "We both lost a lot, didn't we?" I said, more to myself than to him. "We did. Maybe too much," he agreed. As I left the motel, the echoes of our conversation reverberated within me. The drive for revenge had left deep grooves in all our lives, and now, the long road to healing lay ahead. As the leaves turned, heralding the sharp bite of winter, the remnants of my former life fell away, leaving behind a chilling clarity. The isolation I felt was not merely from the loss of Linda or the community's whispered judgments, but from the stark understanding of the depth of the deceit that had fractured my world. With each passing day, my resolve hardened, transforming from a simple desire for retribution into a calculated, cold fury aimed at exposing every hidden lie. I began to delve deeper, tracing the intricate web of deception spun not just by Linda and Jonathan, but by others who had feigned ignorance or even abetted their duplicity. One rainy evening, as I sifted through a box of old receipts and photographs I had once packed away, a faded receipt for a luxury hotel caught my eye. The date and the details suddenly clicked. It was from a business trip Linda had supposedly taken alone, long before Jonathan was in the picture. The realization that her betrayal might have begun even earlier than I had thought sparked a new angle in my plan. Fueled by this new lead, I reached out to a private investigator. Days blurred into nights as we pieced together the timeline, uncovering not just one, but multiple instances where Linda had lied about her whereabouts. Each discovery was a cold jolt, reaffirming my mission. Armed with this new evidence, I planned one final confrontation, a dramatic revelation that would not only disgrace Linda further but also those who had supported her. I invited all implicated to a meeting under the guise of offering an opportunity for reconciliation, at the same hotel from the receipt. The room was tense when Linda, Jonathan, and several old friends entered. I stood by the window, watching their uneasy faces. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady. "Today, you all will learn the full extent of the betrayal that was hidden from me." I systematically laid out the evidence, photographs, dates, communications, irrefutable proof of their conspiracies and lies. Linda's face drained of color, her eyes darting around the room in panic. Jonathan seemed to shrink with each revealed deceit, his betrayal deeper than just a forbidden romance. "What is this, Mark? Why bring us here?" Linda's voice cracked, her composure breaking. "To show you all what it feels like to be betrayed, not just by the person you loved but by friends you trusted," I declared, my voice rising in anger. The room erupted into chaos, accusations flying as once close allies turned on each other, realizing their mutual deceptions had been unveiled. I watched, a bitter satisfaction settling in as they tore each other apart with words and recriminations. As the meeting dissolved into turmoil, I left them to their misery, stepping out into the cold night. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and the stars too distant to offer any warmth. I walked away from the hotel, from Linda, from Jonathan, from all of them, a final line drawn. In the silence of my departure, the weight of the past months began to lift. There was no joy in the destruction, no peace in the revenge. But there was a certain finality. The chapter of my life that had been defined by Linda's betrayal was closed, sealed by the harsh lessons of trust and vengeance. I never saw Linda or Jonathan again. The deceit and the revenge had carved too deep a divide, leaving only the remnants of relationships that once were. My path forward was solitary, but it was one I accepted, the price of freedom from deception, a life built anew on the bedrock of painful truths. The chapter, and the story, conclude with a dramatic and irreversible severing of ties, the protagonist leaving behind not just his past but also any lingering attachments to those who had wronged him. The surprise ending lies not in reconciliation but in the stark revelation of deeper deceptions, cementing the characters' fates to part forever in the shadows of their betrayals.